Yo, it's your boy Logos, and today I want to react to another Jordan Peterson history video. This time Hitler was even more evil than you think. I think this will be an interesting video considering the last one I did where he discussed Hitler was him referencing how Hitler used to be very sensitive to disgust and insects and mice and other vermin and stuff like that. And he transferred that type of thinking and feelings over to Jews, gypsies, and other minorities that he massacred and committed genocide against. So I'm very curious to see how he's gonna say Hitler is even more evil than we can imagine or think. But he always gonna drop some knowledge, so let's get into it.
So here's what you should have done if you were a Nazi and you wanted to win the war. You should have enslaved the Jews and the Gypsies and had them work, right? You should have had them work for the benefit of the victory, and then if you wanted to, you liquidate them afterwards. That's the logical thing to do if you want to win. And we assume that Hitler wanted to win. But that's not a very intelligent assumption. Why would you assume that? He wasn't exactly a good guy. So why should we assume that he was aiming at the good that he was promoting, even in his own terms, right? The glorious, everlasting Third Reich, right? That'll rule for 1,000 years and be a bastion of civilization and music, because that's the sort of thing he purported to be interested in. Well, so what do you do with the Jews and the Gypsies? Well, round them up, fine. Enslave them, fine. You don't kill them. You certainly don't devote a substantial proportion of your war resources while you're losing to accelerate the rate at which the extermination is taking place. Because that's a bit counterproductive, unless what you're aiming at is the maximum possible mayhem in the shortest period of time.
That's a very good point, and I never really thought of it that way. Of course, you see how just the actions that Hitler did was sick and crazy in of itself, but the thought is right because he claimed to want a 1,000-year Reich. He claimed that he invaded Poland for Lebensraum, living space for the German people. He claimed to do all these things and quote unquote for the betterhood of the German people and to fight off quote unquote the capitalist Jewish people that's controlling the world and the West. Like he said all these things, but when you look at the war, World War II, none of the stuff that he did for the most part, especially after Operation Barbarossa, went in line with trying to get those goals accomplished. Like Jordan Peterson just said, funding more and more resources to kill innocent people instead of putting that into your war machine to defend your nation, your country, when you're clearly losing the war, and both sides of people who have a very bad vendetta against you is about to be on your doorstep any month or any year now. It's just a matter of time. And instead of putting that resources to your war to defend yourself and your people, you put that to kill more people. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a guy who cares about winning the war or pushing Germany to the best it could be. It just sounds like a psychopath that just want to massacre people. And that is a very good point that Jordan Peterson brought up.
Well, so what happened as the Germans started to lose the war? Did Hitler lose faith in his own ability? No, he believed that the Germans had betrayed him with weakness.
Exactly.
And so he was perfectly willing to accelerate the rate at which Germany was losing the war. And so when Hitler and his minions had the choice, here's the choice. You can suspend your unnecessary demolition of people, win the damn war, and then pick it up afterwards. Or while you're losing, you can just accelerate the mayhem even though it's counterproductive. It's like, what'd they pick? Well,
he was insanely evil. Like he was so evil and so, I don't know, obsessed or driven or whatever. I can't even wrap my mind around it. But he just threw away the logical, I guess, plan if you wanted to commit something so heinous as like extermination. He didn't go about it in the right, yes, correct way if you wanted to get that plan carried out. Like Jordan Peterson said, if you wanted to make a strong Germany, make sure you win the war, you could use those millions and millions of people to build up your industry, build up your armaments, build up your defenses, build up your trenches and everything, just in case you do have to defend the homeland. He didn't do those things. He just threw lives away behind his own sick ideology. He didn't even try to do things in a sort of logical, pragmatic way to get the result that he wanted. I don't know. He's just crazy. But I think it's important to understand people like him so you can make sure people like him don't repeat, because history does repeat itself or it rhymes. as I think Mark Twain said. But the whole great thing about history is that you can learn from it and take those lessons and impart that in your own life now or in the future.
They pick to accelerate the mayhem. And so to me, there's an old psychoanalytic idea. I think this was derived by Jung. If you can't figure out what someone is doing or why, look at the outcome and infer the motivation. If it produces mayhem, perhaps it was aiming at mayhem. Now, you have to use that dictum carefully. If someone's irritating you, maybe it's because you're irritable and you should sort yourself out, but maybe it's because they're actually aiming at irritating you. And that's the actual motivation. So perhaps not, but it's another tool in your analytical armament. So, and so you see, well, and this is the thing about warfare that's so interesting about because you can attribute it to territoriality. You can attribute it to a war for resources. That's what I would say, wretchedly simple-minded economists presume. People fight over scarce resources. It's like, hey, we're a little bit more sophisticated than that. And first of all, what resources are you talking about? The bloody Inuit had nothing. They lived perfectly well. What did they have? Snow and seal blubber. People can live in unbelievably deprived conditions. And so the idea that there are natural resources that we fight over because there's a shortage of them is a pretty oversimplified view of human beings. It's like, well, why do people fight? Well, maybe they fight sometimes for good reasons, but very, very frequently they fight for bad reasons. Yeah. And those bad reasons are personal as well as sociocultural and economic.
Like, even some of my favorite military generals like Julius Caesar, Napoleon, just Peter the Great, over and over and over again. Oftentimes they go to war for glory or their own ends or means. It's not always a good thing, and sometimes not always a bad thing. And oftentimes it's not just about resources. Yeah, it may be about resources, but really about getting the resources so they can use that for money and more influence or power, so they can push their own outlook on the world or their own politics that they want to see the world go by, or their regional government like Julius Caesar in Rome, then his adopted son Augustus. Just there's different reasons for war, and it could be something so complex as a long grudge going back hundreds of years because of a previous war that nobody alive now can even recall what the actual initial cause of the first war was by. It just depends on the situation. History is weird, and there's multiple different factors with multiple different people with multiple different backgrounds influence it.
If you were a Nazi prison guard, for example, whatever pathologies you were carrying around in your destructive little soul, whatever element of Cain was deeply embedded in you, had the opportunity to be manifest fully at every moment of your waking existence, right? You had these people who were completely beholden to you, with no rights whatsoever, to whom you could do whatever your evil little heart determined. Think, well, maybe that was a motivation for putting them there to begin with. And all the cover story about, well, we're trying to build the Third Reich and we're trying to stabilize the state and we're trying to do all these good things. Maybe that's just a cover story for the real motivation, which is nothing but what? The construction of death camps that killed 6 million people. How about that? And the obliteration of 120 million people on the planet, and the leaving of Europe in ruins. Maybe that was the motivation. Or are we going to attribute to Hitler the highest possible motives? Say, no, it's an archetypal manifestation of Cain. Now, he's going to put up a front that says, well, I'm your savior. It's like, well, destructive people think that Cain is their savior.
That was a very nice way to end it. Destructive people do think you're their savior. I guess that does make sense too, considering the fact that the German people were very vulnerable, very angry because of their lot after the World War I, and that's after already suffering through the British blockade, and then they have to deal with inflation and disease and destruction of their country and the loss of their government, their Kaiser, after being in power. Well, the type of government being in power for such a long time. It left for Germany very vulnerable for a crazy demagogue like Adolf Hitler. And I think well, of course he's evil, but the way that Jordan Peterson laid it out just really illustrated how evil it was, because he did all this crazy stuff and got into power just to massacre people and lead to collapse of countries and destruction of Europe and destruction of different places throughout the whole world. The war just wasn't in France or Germany or Russia. It was in Africa. It was in China. We had the whole war with Japan. It was just a lot of nonsense that came about, and Hitler was a thing behind most of it. Who knows how far Japan could have gone into China, or who knows how long it would have took us to stop Japan from massacring Chinese people and other people that they conquered in Asia if it wasn't for Hitler being around. Maybe it would have took us longer, maybe it would have took us even faster. We just don't know. History is the way it is, but we can always learn from it. It's your boy Logos, and I'll talk to you next time.